Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so delighted to be in conversation with Jackson tonight and to talk to him about many things. But one, I just want to say happy Pride. I love that we're having this conversation now, the day before Juneteenth.
Yes. This yeah, and oh my gosh, Jamia, it's so good to see you. Thank you for doing this, and thank you to Melanie and everyone at the Center for Fiction, and everyone who's turning out for this, because yeah, it is so exciting to it's been really cool to watch how Pride is very different this year by necessity, but also I think by what people are bringing to the table. And I think it's really awesome to see what Pride can be, kind of going back to its original roots and what we're able to do when the focus isn't on parties and corporate rainbowism and that kind of thing.
Yes, and it's so interesting because we had talked a little bit about, okay, what does this mean, in terms of the radical solidarity we're seeing right now, and in terms of pride marches that have been joining with BLM and kind of coming together to realize that all of our liberation depends on all of our liberation in practice and in words and deeds. And one thing I was thinking about was actually when I read your book, which I had the honor of reading early on as a blurber, I was thinking about the scene where you go out dancing with your friends. And I thought about that in the context of one of the things that I've enjoyed so much about what we've been seeing with BLM as we've been leading up to Pride, which is that in the midst of these uprisings, in the midst of righteous anger, there has been joyful defiance. There has been, I think, the video of this beautiful man doing a grand jeté in the middle of the streets in New York to an impromptu music, beautiful images of ballerinas in Richmond doing beautiful dancing, and just seeing gorgeous movement throughout. It made me think of your dancing scene in the book as one of the things that really stuck out to me. And so I was wondering if that brings up anything for you around how we are organizing, and we have so much grief and anger and pain and upset within us that we're still here looking at threats to the humanity of trans people, of Black people, and they're still dancing, and there's resistance in that. And so I just wanted to start with that because I am thinking about what it means to celebrate our collective in the context of our struggles.
Yes, that was beautifully put, and I have felt the same way. I've loved seeing, people dancing, the songs being sung together in solidarity, and I've loved just like really hoping everyone sees those videos in contrast to some of the other things that we've been seeing. I was even just earlier today watching a video of someone was being interviewed by the Associated Press or something like that. But it was a Black trans activist who's been working very, very hard. And it was right after the Supreme Court decision about Title VII of the workplace discrimination being overruled. And we have those protections now, which is amazing. And this person was standing outside of the Stonewall Inn, and they were just jubilant, and they were explaining what had happened. And one thing they said was, we have so much more to fight for. There's so much more that needs to happen, but we are going to take this victory, and it is going to fire us up to keep on going. And I think that's what's so important is we can't ignore our joy. That has to be a part of it. We have to celebrate the victories as they do come. Talking specifically about that moment in the book, so the passage that Jimmy is referring to, for anyone who hasn't read it, is it was shortly after I had come out and started transitioning, and I was at the Philly Trans Wellness Conference, which is the largest free trans health related conference in the world, and it happens every summer. Probably not this summer. I actually haven't checked in, but I assume it's not happening this summer. But what's great about it, it's a wonderful conference, but what's really great is it's kind of a meeting ground of lots of trans people. And so I was there and just sort of hanging out with a lot of other trans masculine folks. And we ended up going out to the neighborhood in Philadelphia, and we went clubbing, which is not really my scene, but I was having a really great time. And there were like a dozen of us. And at one point we ended up on the dance floor at this club, and I don't know who started it, but eventually we all had our shirts off. And like some of us had top surgery and like some hadn't, we're all at our different comfort levels, but we were rocking it. And it was just really cool because I don't think any of us would have felt comfortable doing that as one person. But because there were so many of us, like, even though we weren't the majority, there were probably a couple hundred people there, but we had like the solidarity of each other and the protection of each other. And I think that's something that you see all the time in trans spaces and in queer culture, and it's needing that sort of protection with each other. You sort of build a wall around each other. One thing that I didn't mention in the book, because I didn't know how to tie it in because it's not really my thing to tell, but that that night we had a great time, and we woke up the next morning and found out that the shooting at Pulse had just happened. So literally while we were having that amazing moment ourselves, an incredible tragedy was happening. And so I always think back on that moment, and it's really hard, tying those moments of joy with how much more we have to do and the tragedy that always exists, because that could have happened to us in that club. It could have been someone else coming in there and doing that where we were. And that's the reality that we still live through. And I think that's why those moments of joy and celebrating with each other and being with each other is so important.
Yes. And, I was just thinking about that too, like thinking about Pulse and, these kinds of really painful anniversaries, right? That we had the anniversary of Pulse, and then the anniversary of the Tulsa massacre, right? And then sort of hearing that this administration was fanning the flames by threatening our communities in light of that. And so I think it's important that you shared that part of the story too that wasn't in the book, because I think that it's important to kind of honor that we always kind of have to be there for each other during these times, because it is very, very difficult, and we need righteous solidarity in these moments. So
go ahead.
Go ahead.
One thing I was just going to throw out there was for the queer and trans community specifically, these bars, these clubs, they traditionally have been the only place where we can gather. And so I think that's part of it too. It's the celebration, but it's the only safe space. Not anymore. That's changing in a lot of communities now. There's a lot of great places where you don't have to be exposed to alcohol and all that. But it is a grand tradition, and it's a tradition because of safety and because that being the only place.
Yeah, and I'm thinking a lot about, just the tremendous showing that happened this week in the All Black Lives Matter march.
Oh my gosh, the pictures just I get goosebumps.
It's just pretty impactful to behold, and how we are talking about what it means to protect, defend, and support trans folks all the time, but constantly being aware of the fact that we need to take ownership for not doing so, and to talk about what needs to be done. And I'm feeling hopeful. I had a panel earlier today with an amazing Benedictine nun, Sister Joan Chittister, who I've looked up to for a great amount of time. And she's very radical nun and very fierce. And she named unprompted in the conversation that we need to speak up and stand up within the church that she and I both are part of, about the rights and justice for trans folks. And that gave me great hope to hear a Benedictine nun speak about trans lives and speak about Black lives in this passionate way. She was calling on people who are within the faith and within church to stop being nice and start living with moral courage. Which I thought just gave me chills, and really I think was an amazing call to action. And to hear from her, someone literally of the cloth, speaking in such a way, I feel the transformation is coming.
I think that's such a good summation of the moment too, of it's, stop being nice and start acting with moral courage?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, because I think that's what so many of us white folks need to be doing too. It's you posted your black square, you say that you're nice or whatever. It's time to act, and it's time to have moral courage. I love that.
Yeah, there's so much that lives in my bones now from having that conversation, because she was also kind of, I'm thinking about it now in terms of how we stand up for each other. And, she was kind of pointing at me and others. She's like, oh, I'm pointing at you. She wanted to make sure I knew that through the Zoom screen, saying, you need to be ready, and you need to continue on the path, even when people make it hard, even when speaking truth hurts and you feel isolated and all these things. Because I'd admitted, that doing the work to be a truth teller, right? That can push those of us who are already on the margins even farther to the margins when you aren't conforming to those standards that are imposed upon us, right? And
Yeah.
she was just like, oh yeah, and it's on us to know, yeah, that like it, that when you do that, that is going to be pressuring those who would rather have things stay the same. And I think that's something that's rested in me in terms of how can I be a better ally and sibling to trans folks in my life and beyond, right? And I think a lot of that is around, like you said, just what it would mean to take that to the next level of just like not doing it in a way that's like, oh, that's like, you know, the nice or right thing to do, but to like really acknowledge that the freedom, the liberation is intrinsically tied into mind. You know, once I had someone say a beautiful solidarity statement to me in a healing circle I was in of people who had experienced abuse and survivors of sexual violence. And this group of people said, your wound is our wound. To repeatedly just circling me and other survivors in the circle. And I've never forgotten about that, about what it would mean, you know, for us to really stand in solidarity and say that, you know, as long as trans bodies are being wounded, attacked, hunted, I am feeling that wound. And I, in humanity with you, am going to do whatever it takes to fight, and fight even harder because I have the privilege to be safe while doing so in some spaces. And so while we can't fully empathize, right, in the way that white folks can't fully empathize and can't fully see past their blindness around their own privilege, that we all need to do more and stretch ourselves to really be in deeper solidarity. And so she really, I never expected a nun to be the one to push me to that point in this conversation around, you know, how am I deepening my commitment to being in solidarity, but it really moved me. So I also wanted to talk with you a little bit about something that's been in my mind a lot, because when I read your book, you know, and just knowing about you, I know that you are a big Harry Potter fan. And I wanted to talk with you about what's up for you right now, what's coming up. I think I have been disappointed, upset, and angry that a writer who I look up to is promoting such vile and transphobic language and also rhetoric that's dangerous. It's harmful to people's lives. And I also acknowledge that I can't imagine how folks who are directly impacted must feel about this. And I wanted to ask you about this because I know that Harry Potter is a big part of your life.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, you know, what's coming up for you and what advice might you have for people who've had deep connection to this body of work and maybe feeling confused or unsure about how to relate to it now?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, I think, first of all, you know, anyone who feels like they're done with Harry Potter, totally, like, I support you in that. I get it. I'm definitely, I want to take a step away from at least the official stuff for sure. For me, Harry Potter has always meant so much more. You know, from the very early days, I got involved in the fan community, which ended up being essentially my career. Like some of my earliest jobs were literally working in the Harry Potter fan community. So it's been a huge part of my professional and personal and social and creative life for most of my life. I mean, actually, yeah, I guess if I started reading Harry Potter when I was 9 and I'm 30 now. So like 2/3 of my life have been like hardcore Harry Potter fan. So it's tough, but I think, you know, I never really like idolized J.K. Rowling. I think certainly as a kid, I looked up to her a lot. As a writer, you know, she was like the ultimate. So of course, I really looked up to her in that way. And as the creator of my favorite series that had meant so much to me, but I've always tried to work very hard not to put anyone on a pedestal. But more than that, I think just what the fans have done in the community has always been more special and powerful to me than anything that J.K. Rowling was coming up with. Like the original series, of course, I love and it will always be such a magical thing. But, you know, I would prefer to like go to a Harry and the Potter's Wizard Rock show than go to the theme park that Warner Brothers put up, or frankly, to even see the Fantastic Beasts movies. So that, you know, on a personal note, that's sort of where I'm coming from. But I would also say to anyone who might be hurting, who doesn't know how many amazing fan creations there are out there. Like, if you still want to love and enjoy Harry Potter, but you are hurting from what J.K. Rowling has said, there's a lot out there. My friend Proma wrote a piece in Mashable that's like a whole list of a bunch of fan creations you can go enjoy: videos, podcasts, music, books, whatever. But more to the point of, you know, like, why what she said is a problem, because I feel like this is a thing that's really been missing. I actually stopped talking to media at a certain point, one, because I was just sort of burnt out, which I think is a whole problem we can talk about with marginalized communities when things happen and it's like we're all tired and we know we're the only ones who can do it the way it needs to be done, but we're tired. And that's a whole other thing. But no, I stopped talking to a lot of the media questions that I got, because all they wanted was, Harry Potter fans are sad, and are you ever going to buy anything from Warner Brothers again? And I'm like, what I want to talk about is the fact that she is one of the most talented writers of our generation, and she wrote a 3,600 word essay filled with dog whistles for a movement that has been actively violent against trans people since the 1970s. And she's such a good writer that a lot of people could read it and think it was very reasonable. And so I think, and the one thing that she got right in that piece was that a lot of people are coming to her side because they know that's what they're supposed to do, in a kind of virtue signaling way. And I think she was right about that. I think whether you disagree with her and you're like, yeah, that was transphobic, or you agree with her or think it's at least reasonable, or maybe you're confused, I think like a lot of people are just sort of confused about what she actually meant, because the movement that she aligned herself with has spent years working on their rhetoric to make it seem like they care about trans people, to make it seem like they are feminists, when what they are really doing is, for trans women and trans feminine people, they are painting them as fetishists and people who are going to assault them. And for trans men, masculine and trans masculine people, they are painting us as confused lesbians who need fixing. And so you can't say that you stand with trans people when those are what your beliefs are. And they also use a lot of misinformation that they like to spread, studies that have been refuted and revoked. And so it's a lot. And it's really like, that has been it's been a thing since around the 70s. It's been a growing movement in more organized capacities in the United Kingdom in the last couple of years. And that's concerning enough. Is to violence against trans people enough, but to see one of the most influential figures in the entire world disregarding my connection to Harry Potter, just thinking of her literal influence in the world, it's really, really upsetting to think that they got her as an ally, and to think, you know, she's given so much to charity, she's no longer a billionaire. What if that charity money starts going to their movement? And just even on a more micro level, the individual kids who are already feeling vulnerable or confused about their own identity, and then see that from someone and how much that might affect them, even just on an individual level. There's a lot of reasons it's very upsetting. That was a very long answer.
I know. I really appreciate that answer, because I think about that, like, when does a problematic fave even venture to, like, so far out of the box to being an abuser and a harm doer? And I think, that is what is so troubling about this, that this is kind of verged onto a hardlining sort of extremism that's really harmful. And I've just been thinking about you and so many other people that I know who those books were a balm for so long, and how are people grappling with that? And I've definitely had to grapple with that when I've heard that some of the people that I've read or appreciated had really racist anti-Black views, or things start coming to light, right? And so it's something that I think is important for us to continue to interrogate and to talk about, because it is harmful, like you said, and those dog whistles do have an impact on making the world harder and more dangerous for people to live. So I appreciate you speaking up.
Well, yeah, I mean, and thank you for asking. And the one thing I would add as well is that, like, the stuff with her transphobia is not her first offense. The original series, certainly you can critique for anti-Semitism, fat phobia, femphobia, the racial stereotyping and the lack of representation, the queer baiting of Dumbledore, and there's so many things before we even got to Pottermore and the Fantastic Beasts series and the myriad of issues with all of those. So it's in no way her first offense. And I don't want to in any way sort of compare any of those, but the very long essay, you know, I feel like on a lot of things you can kind of be like, oh, well, maybe, but wow, she made it very clear now. And like you said, aligned herself with a more extremist group too. It's not an unconscious bias. Oh, maybe we can have a conversation and teach her some of these things. It's like, oh, this is where you're at, and you're not moving from there.
And I think your point about what becomes normalized is reasonable, and what kind of political context and conversation is really important, because I know, you know, in terms of someone who I personally knew who had been like connected to a loved one in a friend relationship, who was starting to get red pilled over time. But the place in which I gave the ultimatum and said, you know, they're not allowed to kind of be near me or anyone who considers to be a loved one, was when I found out that they were making an argument that there was a difference between a white nationalist and a white supremacist. And it was a similar sort of exploration to say, oh, you can't say I'm not racist, and still justify the relationships that you have and all these other things, when you are kind of spewing rhetoric that is mirrored by extremist sites that are used to organize Charlottesville and other hate and other actions that are damaging and threatening to humanity. So I thought that your point about, you know, people normalizing and seemingly making certain things reasonable because of how they position it, the respectability, what platform they release it on, it's still hate speech and should be treated as such. And I think it's important, and we need to actually be much more vigilant. And I think in this climate, to kind of knowing what it is, even if it's wrapped in wrapping paper that isn't on fire, it doesn't mean it's not going to explode.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, there were, just speaking specifically about her essay that she wrote, there were a number of folks on Twitter who pointed out very astutely that, like, you know, if we, as I think we can all agree, we all desperately need more media literacy education in this country for all of us at any age, but I'd love to see it in schools. And if you look at her essay, she talks about a lot of studies, she doesn't cite to any. You know, so even just like little things like that, if you were thinking about it from a critical lens, you can be like, wait, I don't know about this argument. Maybe we should check this out. But anyways.
No, it's true, right? And it's sometimes it's kind of like, who gets to be seen as credible for all of the different other systems we're talking about around privilege, right? And who gets to make asinine emotional arguments and be seen as logical or reasonable, and who gets to be undermined and be seen as angry or shrill. That is a whole other conversation that I think we need to continue to have, and be able to learn and unpack how we also have been taught and conditioned to respect authority from certain voices and that are packaged in a certain way. And I think that what you said beautifully illustrates that. So another thing I was curious about is just, you know, you write about your upbringing, you write about Texas, and you've mentioned that, you know, you saw some progression that has happened over time. And I am from the South originally as well, and have been thinking about, you know, in an elections year, in the context of all the things that are happening now and things I didn't think I would see happening, kind of happening with people that I might have gone to school with, et cetera. I'm wondering, where are you right now, sort of on the spectrum of hopeful or like cynical / hopeful about what is possible in light of everything that's happened in the last 4 years and like up into this 2020 zeitgeist that I believe I can say we're in?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just watching the different demonstrations and protests happening out of Texas has made me really hopeful, honestly. I mean, Austin, Houston, Dallas. Now, I mean, I say that with the caveat that the police have been absolutely horrific in a lot of cases in those specific cities, but the people coming out, and I think what's really great too is, and I think it was Barack Obama who was saying this. I was like, who did I hear this from? I think it was Barack Obama when he did that live stream recently of, you know, one of the things that's heartening about this particular movement right now is that it's not just Black people who are coming out. You know, it's lots of white people and lots of all kinds of people of color, just all different like classes and everything. And it's amazing to see the diversity of people coming out. And when you look in Austin, it is like, or not Austin, in Texas, it is a lot of white people. And that just makes me at least feel like, okay, this is good. And I think Texas is maybe changing a little bit for the better, because one thing that I have felt when I've gone back there is that, you know, maybe people of my generation have really progressed when it comes to LGB issues, maybe a little bit LGBTQ plus, but definitely LGB, and on the environment in a lot of ways, and maybe some of them even on immigration. But when it comes to a lot of racial justice, and when it comes to, you know, defunding the police and a lot of issues like that, and you I imagine would know better than I would, but just in the South, I feel like that is where they're not quite. And when I say that, obviously there are a lot of amazing progressive people and Black people and people of color in the South, but of those sort of like white suburban people, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. I'm really thinking now about, you know, what the collective power of protest will yield, and what this will mean for what things look like 4 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 100 years from now, right? I think we're really planting seeds for a groundswell of shift, and I'm really excited about it. I mean, I don't know that I'm going to get to live to see all of it that I want to see immediately yesterday, but that I'm feeling really hopeful in this next generation of people who are on the come up right now. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that too, because I imagine you probably get a lot of emails and correspondence and people who follow your YouTube asking you for advice and asking you about, you know, how you've been able to kind of own your voice and own who you are, and the service of kind of uplifting issues that are helping to move people's hearts and minds. And I'm wondering, what are some of the themes that you hear back? And like, maybe you could share with me some of the common questions you get, or the common advice that you give, because I imagine there might even be people here with us today who might be seeking some of that wisdom.
Yeah, well, one of the tough things for me is that I feel like some of the most common questions I get are about coming out to parents and dealing with teachers. And I came out when I was 25, and I wasn't even like, a lot of trans people might have, like, you know, came out as gay in high school and then came out as trans later. And like, I didn't even have that. I've been wanting to make a video for a long time about that sort of difference of people who were like trans people who were part of the queer community before and who weren't, because in my experience with lots of different people I've met, we have had very different experiences, and it's interesting to parse out. But yeah, so I always feel like I can't quite give that advice. I get so many like parents who ask me, I'm like, I don't have kids. And then I get like teenagers ask me, I'm like, I really don't know. But you know, I think what is great, sort of going back to what you were saying of how things are moving along, is that there are so many more resources now than there were when I was there. When I was in high school in a very Christian community in Texas, where I remember one time overhearing kids trying to start a Harry Potter club, and they were getting in very big trouble. And so it's like, not that I would have had the thought, but my gosh, we would have never tried to start a gay straight alliance. We couldn't even have a Harry Potter club. That said, I did form a ironic Bolshevik club, but we got that. So, but yeah, I mean, I think using the resources that are out there, but it is tough to even recommend that, because I remember what it's like to be in that place where even if you know that some of those resources exist, whether it's a support group, maybe it's a counselor, maybe it's a website or something like that, it can be hard to find those things. And then it can be really hard to work up the courage to do it, to go there. And maybe it's because you don't want other people to know. Maybe it's because you don't want to, you know, be outed. A lot of times what it is making it real, knowing if you take that step, then all of a sudden it's kind of real. And even though you might so badly want to move towards that reality, it can be really, really tough and scary to get there. And so I always want to recognize that. And I also always want to recognize that there's a lot of, places in the US and certainly outside of it where those resources don't exist. I can get a little annoyed sometimes when the advice to queer and trans youth is just like, oh, talk to your GSA advisor. And I'm like, so many places don't have that. And it's like, oh, go to your local LGBTQ plus center. It's like, that's a 6-hour drive for some people. And so, especially in those cases, I think it's really important if you are able to find online communities. I got some very good advice when I really needed to hear it, that those are really wonderful places, but that can't be the end point. Because I think they are amazing, if you can, and it doesn't even have to be a queer specific community, but finding some type of friend and community where you can be yourself online. I mean, heck, maybe you're playing online video games. I don't understand how those work. But you're playing video games and you get to use the name that your chosen name that affirms you, and you get to use your pronouns and stuff when maybe it's not a reality to get to use them in real life. That can be a nice escape to help you out. But one day it has to go beyond online, because I think I definitely fell into that trap where I got really comfortable on my anonymous Tumblr and just spent years not being able to make the move into getting the help that I needed in person. So those are, that's kind of the biggest theme of a lot of the questions that I get, which I think makes sense, because one thing that does happen with in the trans community, I can't quite speak to as much for the rest of the queer community, but a lot of times, if we are lucky and privileged enough to be able to get to a point in our transitions where we don't have to think about being trans all the time, we often leave the community and stop making or consuming the media as much, which there's a lot of fallout we can discuss from that. But that is just to say, a lot of folks who I'm kind of directing the things that I make, whether it's videos or writing or podcasts, I'm often directing it to those people who are maybe earlier on in their journeys, no matter what age they are, and sort of trying to find that community and those answers. And I'm just so grateful with all the bad that has come to, so grateful for social media, because there just wasn't a space for trans people to be able to tell their stories on their terms to the extent that we're seeing now. I mean, barely at all before. There were a handful of books published by trans people prior to 2010. And sure, we appeared on daytime talk shows and stuff, but it was so rarely our narrative. And so being able to post YouTube videos and Instagram posts and now podcasts and so many other things, but that was game changing, because it was also all the trans people who were getting access to books and daytime TV shows before were, middle class, upper middle class white people. And so now we get to see such a diversity of experiences, of races, of body types, of sexualities. And it's just absolutely beautiful to get to see that representation now, because I know for me, I needed to see someone who I saw myself in a real way of I could be friends with that guy, not, oh, here's a 40-year-old man and I'm 20 and trying to relate to him. I can't see myself in him. And everyone needs that, which means we just need more and more and more and more, so many different types of representation.
That's amazing. And I think you're so right, because I think that we often don't have the class conversation as it relates to this issue. And I think it's extremely important, because similarly to the ways in which you'll hear sort of opponents to justice deflect or derail around gender justice issues and racial justice issues, about things that they say are legally protected. It's really important to say, that yes, there are some people who may be able to have the means to live more comfortably due to their privilege, but it still doesn't mean that you can deny them their humanity, and that those who can't will truly be denied their humanity in even more egregious ways. And I think it's extremely important. I was thinking about how the Equal Rights Amendment conversation is a really important one. And I had participated in a town hall this week about that as well, and how often people don't know that marginalized genders are not covered or protected under the Constitution, and don't know the history that explains that one of the ways that opponents of the Equal Rights Amendment were able to derail and destroy it for so long, and destroy those efforts, had to do with them using and stoking the fires of fear around trans rights and trans justice in the 80s and the 70s. And I think that it's really important to help folks connect those dots to understand that that those forces have existed for a very long time, and that we have so much work to do to unpack and do that together. And we were just talking about also what it means to have broader conversations around education, right? So I'm thinking too, when you're talking about what it was like in school when you were starting this Bolshevik club, like what would it have looked like if you were having conversations about identity in school and elementary school, and normalizing those conversations in a social emotional learning environment. So I was wondering too, before we go to questions from our wonderful audience, what would you like to see if we could kind of envision how we would educate young people? Because I see that as a part of your work. I think you're doing labor, right? That I wish you were getting compensated more for, to help educate. That should really be done in our schools too. And I thought about it because I've written about it in a children's book, but another book I'm doing for teens, I'm writing about identity and kind of through the lens of my own formation of identity, and coming to a discovery at kind of a later age in childhood, though, of how I was taught to conform to a certain gender presentation and performance, and how I was in a feminist family, in a progressive family, written off and questioning it, that it so threatened people that I asked why. The question was, why did you pierce my ears like a week into my birth? Because like maybe I wouldn't have wanted that. And I didn't understand like why you would and I wanted to know if I cried. And I think it really affected the adults in my life that I asked that question. I felt so put upon, that decision was made for me. But I think it was more the answer that they said, oh, well, you didn't have a lot of hair. And so we had to give you a headband and give you earrings so that people would know you were a girl. We were tired of them asking.
My gosh.
And that being something that really bugged me and still continues to bug me for this time, but in a household of liberal people, right? So I'm asking a question about education because I think that what I am hoping to do is have young people understand this earlier, and to say that just because adults are sort of assigning you gender and they're having these conversations, it doesn't mean that it's true, even those who are well-meaning.
Yeah. Well, quickly on the note of ear piercing at a young age, there's a reason so many trans guys wear gauges and rock that look. There's a reason for
it. I want to know about this.
It's like, yeah, I mean, whether it happened to us as babies or, before we figured ourselves out. And fortunately, over my adolescence and adulthood, it has become cool for guys to wear like 2 earrings. But anyways, no, there's so much that I think we would all love to see reformed in education. I have a friend, his name is Jess Clark, and he works at a violence prevention center in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was actually on an episode of my podcast, Transmission, if anyone wants to look it up and hear a full hour-long interview with him. But he does a lot of teaching for the Violence Prevention Center, both at companies, but also at schools and in elementary schools. And he teaches kids about consent. And what he has sort of built as part of his curriculum and methodology is that you kind of can't teach consent without teaching about gender and about identity, because so much of it is about understanding your body and respecting your body as your own and giving you that agency. And so he does, and it's all age appropriate. He's not teaching, 3rd graders about sex or anything like that. And he's just sort of explaining, he does one exercise with like a boy box and a girl box. And like, he really breaks down toxic masculinity with these like elementary schoolers. It's amazing. And I think there's so many ways like that where it's absolutely age appropriate. It's the kinds of things that we need to start at that young age. I often think about Willow Smith when she shaved her hair, and there was some interview, I don't know if it was with Jada or Will or both of them, but they just sort of said like, if we told her no, that would be like we're controlling her body, and we don't want to do that. Like this is her body, and she's allowed to do with it what she wants. It's like, yes, that's what so many more parents need to say. But, you know, specifically on the matter of understanding gender and other gender identities and sexuality to a certain extent, like I think that needs to be baked in from the very beginning, because when it's normalized in that way, not only is it of course very helpful for any kids who feel like they themselves might be trans or queer, but all the other kids it's normalized for. So they're going to grow up just thinking it's normal and respecting them with the same dignity that they do anyone else. They're not going to grow up to be these bullies that we see in our Congress and on our streets and everywhere. And so I think it's very, very important that we're able to do that. And I do definitely see it happening. You know, some schools are trying to take those steps. A lot of individual educators are, for sure. Unfortunately, we still have a growing number of states who are trying to outlaw teachers even being allowed to say the word gay. So, you know, we're seeing a lot of both sides right now.
Yeah, and I thank you for saying that, because I think too, you know, I think about it even myself as a writer of children's books, about, you know, every time I learn about, oh, how could I say that differently? How could I have made choices that would normalize these conversations for children? And I've learned so much from kids who have written me to say, one of the books that I did, my second children's book, I was writing it because I'm an only child, and I'd always wanted a big sister, and the designer of this book is also an only child. But we were getting a lot of feedback from genderqueer kids, as well as cis boys, who were saying that the way that we colored the book, some of the ways in which we presented it, even though it was an inclusive book, they wanted us to have the feedback. And these are 9-year-olds. I love this. Just saying, you know, this book is for us too. We need to learn about how to be vulnerable in our feelings. We need to learn how to have deeper and more tender relationships. And why is there a presentation in this book as if you're writing it for a specific demographic? And I thought, you know, I did intend for more children to have access to this, but still fell into the same trap of my own conditioning.
Which is so easy to do.
Do that, exactly. Yeah. But it shouldn't let me off the hook, because I think now, and we've talked about it a lot, but I appreciate you understanding that it's easy to do, but I'm also wanting to take responsibility that I thought, okay, that the fact that I'm having kids write me or say in some of these conversations, which were amazing, saying, oh, we love the book, but, you know, a couple of boys that I met in Manchester said this to me in England. They said, you know, it was annoying to me that my sister got the book, that like when the school was doing the drives, that those were the people who they had order it. And then after I did the talk, they said, everything you said could have applied to my life. And no one's talking to us about how to have compassionate, nonviolent communication and disagreement with folks. And we should be learning that too. And so it opened my eyes to thinking about, you know, who I'm writing to and for.
Yeah.
Well, and thinking about that a lot, and also, you know, learning and trying to do better next time, and taking responsibility when I do, and you know, next time. And so that's why the next book that we did, we took the kids' advice about the color and how we presented things and all of that. And I want to see more people doing that too, because I learned a lot from just listening.
Yeah. Listening is so important. First of all, I'll just quickly say, for anyone who doesn't know, Jamia has written a number of books, and they're all amazing. Young, Gifted, and Black, Step Into Your Power. Also, I didn't realize till I saw this at my local bookstore several months ago that you wrote the ABCs of AOC.
I did.
I knew that was a book. I didn't know you had done it until I saw it. I was like, oh my gosh, Jamia did that. AOC is my representative, so it's just like, oh, all these people I love working together.
So awesome.
Yeah. So
I'm
everyone.
so jealous.
I thought she might be here, but okay. But yeah, everyone go check out Jamia's books. A lot of the kids' books make amazing gifts right now. And but what was it? Oh, the listening and the learning. It's sort of going back to the J.K. Rowling thing. And I think I tweeted this, but one thing that really bothers me is that she had so many people replying to her. And I know there's one element of like, she's this very wealthy person in a castle, and like you kind of get this bubble when you're that level of person. So maybe she hasn't been exposed to certain experiences, but at the same time, like, she is publicly on the internet and she gets a lot of people talking to her. And one of the things that I find so rewarding, whether it's going to, you know, book events or speaking at schools, or even just comments on my videos and tweets that I get in emails and stuff, is like, I get to hear so many people's stories which helps me learn and grow. I mean, there's been so many times that I've like accidentally kind of made a absolutist type of statement and someone's like, no, not my experience, please don't erase me. And it's just such a wonderful opportunity for me to get to learn and grow. And I think that's one of my favorite parts about being public with my story, is that I get to learn and I get to listen and grow. And so it's disappointing when some people don't see that amazing opportunity that they have in front of them. But I fully agree. I think it's awesome.
Thanks. I'm really, thank you so much for being so supportive of my books too. And I love your book. So I want everyone to get a copy of Sorted. I'm pointing downward because I know you have a little button there.
It's like a button, yeah.
So just like make sure you click on that and get your discount tonight and get your copy. You're going to love it. And it's by far one of my top 5 favorite book covers I've seen. And I see a lot of book covers as someone.
Working at Fitness Press.
So
it is always like has such good designs too. Like all your books, your covers are so good.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm lucky to work with amazing folks. And we were all passing around Jackson's book and looking at that cover and marveling on how beautiful and creative it is. So I have
least Googleable name ever, but that's the cover designer. So her name is Sarah Smith. She did an amazing job.
Ooh, yeah, we got to get her some SEO.
Right? Yeah.
Sure, right? Like what's that middle initial? Or maybe she should adopt X as the middle initial or something like that.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of really great questions here, and I think I want to look through and see what everyone's asking to see if we've answered any of these. So one, I think I was wondering, there's a question here about how are you finding community, whichever community, and joy in a time of in-person events being canceled or postponed? And I feel like there's so much in that question, so I'd love to ask you about it.
Yeah, well, in terms of community and sort of fighting isolation, I'm overwhelmed by how much is happening online, frankly. Like, I feel like I've never been busier, and there's just so many more cool things to go to because you're not limited by geography now. So many, like, bookstores or different places I would have wanted to go to but couldn't. They're all doing it virtually, like tonight. This is great. So definitely, look out for those, because a lot of them, like this wonderful Pride series, is happening around a theme. And there is also, I'm trying to think the best way that you can find it. There is a group of trans men who've been doing regular meetings. I was a speaker at one of them. They're doing a whole series. And so if you are on the transmasculine spectrum, or even not I think some of them are open to cis men as well. But if you look up Rocco Coyotes or Camp Lost Boys on social media or their website, you should be able to find those. So that's a really great meeting ground for anyone here who's on the transmasculine side of things. But I can only imagine there's a million things like that happening out there. So I would really seek out, these things. A friend of mine went to a concert last night, and like there's just so much going on online, and like using chat features like this. And I saw someone in the chat mentioning Discord. I've yet to quite figure out Discord, but I know that there's a lot of communities being built around there that are a really great outlet for people. So especially if you're still somewhere that is locking down, if you're still staying at home, and especially if you are stuck with an unsupportive family or partners or roommate or what have you, to the extent that you're able to find those online communities, I think that's never been more important than right now. And also there are, a number of sites out there with counselors you can talk to. Trans Lifeline is out there specifically for trans people, by and for trans people. So please, utilize that service if you need to. I mean, in terms of finding joy, I like what we were sort of saying at the start, Jamia. Like there's, on the pandemic side of things, it's a little bit hard to find joy, admittedly. But in terms of, the protests and what we're seeing, there's a lot of tragedy there. There's a lot of really hard stuff there. But, my personal feeling and what I've heard from a lot of my friends who are activists and who are out there is we're feeling really hopeful. This does feel a little bit different than it has before. And I think, we've already seen some change happening. The fact that more conservative politicians are saying like, no, don't defund the police. I want to reform the police. I can't, but I agree, like reforming is not enough, but like the fact that they are adamant for reform now, like that's huge. Again, we have so much further to go, but like huge things have already happened. So I'm finding joy in just what we're seeing in people coming together. And around the movement right now, but also throughout the pandemic, like the sense of community and the way people have been supporting each other, their neighbors and healthcare workers and all essential workers. Like we have really seen people come together, and I kind of think we're all going to come out of this being a bit more thoughtful. There's so much that we have to consider in our lives now. And there's a lot of things that we might not take for granted going forward. And so I think that's wonderful. But also, just escaping into some good books and Netflix shows, sometimes listening to some good music, going for walks if you can safely. Those are all the little things. If you're able to garden, my plants have been great.
So you said listening to good music. Someone asked, what is your favorite song right now?
Oh, song is tough. Spotify has been doing a lot of the 2000s indie rock radio, and I did not realize how much of a indie trash I was in high school, because I'm just I'm feeling that. But my favorite band, I might call them my favorite band now. They're my top most played on iTunes and Spotify for about 15 years now, and I don't know any of the band members' names. I know nothing about this band, but I listen to them nonstop. Their name is Sherwood, and it's just kind of poppy sort of music, but it's my favorite summer and spring music. And they have a song called "The Only Song."
Ooh.
That is probably my most listened to song ever, actually. So check out Sherwood. It's very good summer music.
And so this question, I feel like this is such a beautiful question. And I think, just a great question in terms of the context of what this conversation is about: metamorphosis, transformation. How do you find the courage to be your true self? I've been questioning for 5 years and have just recently had the revelation that I'm most likely F to M, but I struggle with fighting through other people's doubts about my identity to be my true self.
That's the hardest thing. That's so hard. And yeah, I spent 5 years from sort of realizing, learning the words and realizing transition was a thing before I came out, just 5 lonely years. So I really, really feel you. And that's kind of the big question that I was dealing with. And you've got to find the right answer for you, but I can share a little bit of what was going through my head. And for me, I think I felt like I was pretty sure that ultimately transitioning was the right thing and was going to be the right move, and that I was going to be much happier living in the world and being viewed as male. And I knew that the longer I put it off, so I sort of knew what was bothering me was the awkward time, the hardness of coming out to people and how difficult that would be, and how long it would take people to get used to me. And I was so scared of that time, even if I knew it was going to be better a little bit after that. But what I started realizing was the longer I put off that really hard part, the longer it would be to get to the good part. And so that was something that stuck with me a lot. And I don't even exactly remember what it was that finally just sort of flipped the switch and made me do it. I think I just sort of, like a lot of things in life, you just sort of know when you know, and you get to that place where you have to do it. I mean, certainly a lot of things had kind of come to a head. And for me, at least, I was fortunate that a few things had happened in my life to stabilize other things. I was just a hot mess in every sector of my life for a long time. And once some things stabled out, I felt like I could finally take the steps with transitioning I needed to. But it's really tough. You have to do a lot of just self-actualizing work. I mean, this is why I think us as trans people, we're great and we're very wise, because we've had to just think a lot, really deeply, on a lot of stuff that a lot of people never have to. They might, but they don't necessarily have to in the same way we do. So it is really tough to go through that. And I would keep also just reading and listening to and watching as many stories from other people as you can, because maybe nothing I said here was helpful, but maybe you'll hear something from someone else, and it'll be the thing that really helps you out there.
So as we come to a close, and I'm sad because there's so much that I want to ask. So much fun, and just what a beautiful community of people who have come together with us tonight. I love you all. I wanted to just ask if you've seen some of these questions here, if there are some resources that you can share around where people might be able to find some more answers to their questions. I can say that some of the questions that I see here that haven't been unanswered yet are definitely answered and sorted. So I do want to say that if we weren't able to answer your question here in real time, when you read the book and you deeply connect with Jackson's story, you'll see some answers to some of these questions that are here. If you're on your own journey, read the book, and I think you're gonna see yourself in the pages. You know, that's why I write books and why we do the work at Feminist Press. We want to create a world where everyone recognizes themselves in a book, and that's why I'm really excited, because this is a book where so many people are going to recognize themselves in many ways. So do you have any other resources you'd like to share in addition to this beautiful book that everyone should join and buy tonight, and buy one for friends also?
You're such a good hype woman. I love it.
Hyping up right here.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, even just apart from my narrative, the back of the book does have like a ton of resources that I link to. And in person, I usually tell people like, okay, if you can't buy it right now, take a picture of this. Like I open it up from like, it's fine. Because I always forget when I'm like in the moment. But I will say my website does have a resources page that has most of the resources that are in the back of the book. So I will type it in the chat in a minute. It's jacksonbird.cool/resources. And that's a lot of, a lot of websites, like GLAD and and Glisten and different places that have a ton of resources themselves, but also videos I recommend, other books, so many other books. Because the one thing I do always say about this book is that it should be a starting place. I have as a trans person, I'm like almost at the peak of privilege mountain. And so I think there's one good thing to take away from that, which is that if someone with that much privilege can still struggle as much as I did, then imagine, what other people must be going through. But mostly just like, do not take my experience as the one trans experience. Please use my book to go learn so much more and read so much more from other people and hear other trans stories. So yes, thank you, Center for Fiction. Thank you, Melanie, posting that there. So there's a lot of resources there, and in the book as well.
Wonderful. Well, I just want to thank you so much. I've had a great time talking with you tonight, and I can't wait for your next book. I know it's going to be amazing, and just want everyone to stay safe and stay well, and to keep following Jackson on Instagram, on Twitter, and also on YouTube.
Yeah, and everyone go follow Jamia, read all of her books. And Melanie will probably say this in a minute, but keep tuning in for this Pride series because there are so many amazing guests. And yeah, thank you to both of you. This has been so much fun tonight. And thank you to everyone for all of your questions.
Yes, thank you both. That was an amazing conversation. So grateful to you. And thank you, everybody who came tonight. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.